Hello and welcome to another Cheeky Scientist training seminar. I'm Isaiah Henkel with Cheeky Scientist, and today we're talking about 5 advantages that PhDs have over other job candidates. So one of the questions or concerns we get a lot from PhDs is that somehow their PhD is a disadvantage. And we understand this because if you've been in academia, especially if you've stayed in a postdoc, you can probably feel like your PhD was maybe a mistake. Maybe it is a disadvantage because you're not getting paid well, you're not being respected, you're not on the career track you thought you were going to be on. But we also hear that a PhD, we hear the concern that a PhD might be at disadvantage in industry. And this is just not the case, right? So for example, we often get the question of, should I leave my PhD off of my resume? As if you would do all this work to become a doctor, a PhD in a very specific field, and then want to hide the fact that you have a PhD and somehow that's going to benefit you. This is not the case. Your PhD is very valuable, and as a PhD you have several advantages over other job candidates. So we're going to talk about some of those advantages, and the reason it's important for you to know about these advantages is so that you can leverage them and communicate them on your resume, on your LinkedIn profile, during networking events, informational interviews, and of course real interviews, phone screens, site visits, and so forth. Okay, so these 5 things you want to communicate over and over and over again throughout your job search process because they are an advantage to you, right? We always talk about remember your value as a PhD. It is valuable. I'm sorry to say for anybody else watching if you don't have a PhD, but PhDs have advantages over other job candidates, and especially in industry. We're seeing a lot of PhDs getting hired right now, and it's because of these advantages. So first of all, realize that as a PhD, you are very rare in a good way, okay? Less than 2% of the population has any kind of doctorate, right? For PhDs, it's even less. It's 1-point-something% actually have PhDs in the world. So you have more education than 98% of the worldwide population, okay? I know that you probably are used to being around PhDs. Everyone you work with is a PhD. Don't forget the fact that you're rare and valuable, okay? In terms of the first advantage, PhDs are expert innovators, okay? Expert innovators. Now, what does that mean? Why is that important? Most people only know how to regurgitate information, right? Even by definition, a master's degree, for example, means you have to master the field, right? You have to master the known field. A PhD, however, has to what? Add to the field. Okay, so that's the differentiator, and that's what makes a PhD so valuable, is that PhDs, they have to innovate even to get a PhD. They have to discover brand new information. And there's a big difference between understanding something and discovering something, okay? PhDs are valuable, but they don't communicate this enough. So start communicating this on your resumes, your LinkedIn profiles, networking, and so forth. It's a huge advantage that you have, and industry employers are looking for innovators. It's a top transferable skill. Number 2, masters of conflict resolution. Okay, you're probably laughing to yourself because you realize that as a PhD you've had to overcome a lot of conflict. We like to use the example of Shark Tank. Okay, it's a very popular TV show where some entrepreneurs walk into a room with 5 elite people in business, and they basically get their ideas attacked. And this is very similar to what? Every PhD thesis defense, right? Even your thesis meetings, you have to walk into a room with 5 other doctors who are advanced in their fields, and they tear apart your logic. And you stand there and take it. You know how to combat their objections to your work, for example. You know how to respond. You know how to even say things like, I don't know, but this is how I can find out. Most people do not have that skill. They crumble under pressure. They can't handle it. If you have a PhD, you can handle it, and you've been trained in it. You are a master of conflict resolution. Going into industry, the conflict you're going to experience there, it's far less than what you've experienced in academia. It really is, because in industry, everybody's working as a team to get something done. You're not going to have things torn apart, like you do on every single thesis committee. You have these skills. Industry employers want people who can stand up to stress, who can face the heat, who can work with a customer who might be disgruntled. Especially a high-level customer. As a PhD, you have this skill, so make sure you're communicating it. All right, number 3, a PhD is literally a doctor of learning. Okay, what does a PhD stand for? A doctor of philosophy. What is philosophy? Knowledge and the ability to ascertain knowledge. Okay, so again, if you have a PhD, you are literally a doctor of learning. Why is this important? It's because industry employers want to hire people who they can train on the job. They want to hire people who can learn quickly and who can learn things their way. That's why it doesn't matter if you don't have industry experience. If you're a PhD and don't have industry experience, it's fine. You need to lean into this skill on your resume, your LinkedIn profile. It's a transferable skill. You should be communicating over and over again. You have it as a PhD, okay? You can learn anything. You probably have noticed that once you get your PhD, a lot of PhDs go and do postdoctoral work that's in a different field. In fact, this is encouraged for them to do postdoctoral work that's in a different field because it gives them more scientific experience or engineering experience overall. The same thing is true in industry. You don't have to look for a job that is exactly in line with your PhD experience. We always hear PhDs saying, well, I can't find a job in my specific little background in computational chemical engineering, right? Your background does not matter. The fact that you're a PhD and you're a doctor of learning and can learn anything does matter. Number 4, adept problem solvers, all right? So what does adept mean? It just means that you're very proficient in it. You are experienced. Sure, most people can solve some problems, but the problems that you're able to solve as a PhD is at a whole different level, okay? And a big part of problem solving is being able to deal with uncertainty and failure. Most people cannot deal with this. Again, they crumble under the pressure. As a PhD, you learned very quickly in graduate school, especially if you work in a lab, you have to do some type of experiments. As you try to discover something new, you often failed over and over and over again. I mean, how many of your experiments have failed, right? Most people don't go through that failure process, and that is a process that makes you tougher, makes you stronger in terms of your professional capabilities, and makes you able to problem solve better without getting set back just because you had a failure, okay? This is very valuable also. You need to explain this again on your resumes, your LinkedIn profiles. It's a transferable skill. You should be communicating it all the way through to your site visit. And then finally, PhDs are competitive collaborators. What does that mean? It means that as a PhD, you are a self-starter. You are fine working on your own. You're very capable. You can get a project done that's been explained to you, again, by yourself. At the same time, you're able to collaborate, right? There's this misconception by PhDs mostly that industry people are afraid that you can't work on a team. You've had to work in a lab in very tight quarters in most cases, or with other professors if you're teaching, whatever it might be. You've had to work with other people. Maybe it's to figure out, shared instrument time. Maybe it's just the fact that you had to get a publication done where there's multiple people on a publication. These are all proofs of principle that you can use during your job search process to show that you are a team player. You are a collaborator, but at the same time, you can work by yourself and you can compete in a competitive business industry. So this is something you should be communicating too. And then finally, I just threw up some numbers here. Again, we always get that question about whether or not a PhD should leave a PhD off their resume. Absolutely not. It's a massive advantage. Not only that, PhDs get paid more, about $15,000 more on average than those with their master's degree only. Right? So the average is $84,396 for a PhD. It's only $69,732 for a master's. You can look that up yourself, pay scale, Glassdoor, the ranges vary. Long story short, as a PhD, you will be paid more. It's much more valuable. On the interviewing process, right, when you interview for a job that may only ask for a master's degree, that's fine. Very often what we see happen is that they'll create an elevated position for a PhD. So they'll turn a scientist position into a senior scientist position, and they'll elevate your pay as well. So you should never not apply to something just because it doesn't specifically say PhD needed. Your PhD is a big advantage. Use it, leverage it, and remember your value as a PhD because in industry you are in demand. Industry employers are hiring PhDs right now. You see this across the board in every industry, no matter what your background is. So the time to transition, if you're interested, is now. And if you want to learn more about transitioning into industry, just go to phdsgethired.com. So the URL is down here, phdsgethired.com to learn more about transitioning into industry. And this takes us to the end of this training seminar. I will see you next week.